Alright, welcome to the video, the illegal interview questions. Have you ever wondered about the types of questions that they cannot ask you during a job interview? Well, that's what we'll be discussing. I'll be discussing in this video. So I'll show you the different types of illegal questions, as well as give you some examples under each heading, and finish off with some interview preparation tips if you have one coming up. I'm Professor Job Offer, and I've spent the last 10 years with a number of Forbes Global 2000 companies and have a track record of helping people land jobs and interviews at companies like this, including Amazon and Google. And I'm here to share with you my tips and tricks on landing your next job offer. So let's start off with the different types of illegal questions. First and foremost, we need to actually first understand why these types of questions are illegal. It's actually to prevent the employer from any kind of discrimination based on the information and answers that you give from these questions. So let's take a look. First and foremost, the genetic information. What do we mean by this? We're talking about the age, weight, height, the color of your eyes, hair, and skin, because this information may be used against some candidates or for some candidates to have preference over it. And the next one, they cannot ask you about your offenses as in like arrest records, criminal records, and convictions, whether they were pardoned or not. Of course, some states, some countries allow you to allow the employer to conduct background checks upon the agreement by the candidates, but they cannot ask you directly during the interview whether you have been arrested or have any criminal records. The third type is the background. What do we mean by the background? They cannot ask you about your citizenship, your nationality, ethnicity, birthplace, religion, and so on. And you might think, well, how is citizenship different from nationality and ethnicity? So, well, nationality is kind of referring to where your parents are from and where you're born in. Citizenship, you can actually have multiple citizenships, and so on. So they're not allowed to ask about this because based on where you're from or what your citizenship is or what your religion is, employer may use that information against you and have less of a preference, which means some degree of discrimination. And next one, they cannot ask about your health information. What do we mean by this? Disabilities, any kind of diseases that you may have, some kind of medical conditions, or any kind of drugs or medication that you may be taking. They're not allowed to ask this. Why? Because same thing. This information and how you provide this information may be used against the candidate or for some candidates to prefer them over other options, other candidates. Next one, the family status. Okay, well, why is this important? Because depending on whether you have children or if you're expecting children, the employer may or may not want to have you on board because, if you're a woman, for example, and if you're giving birth, then you may be asking for a maternity leave, and that's something that the employer may not want. They would not want a gap within their team, right? So they cannot ask about your marital status, whether somebody's pregnant or expecting children or have any children as well. And lastly, the sixth category are the other types of questions. What are the other ones? So it's pretty much all the other stuff. An individual's sexual orientation or gender identification. Nowadays, there's multiple, so many different genders that an individual actually can identify themselves as, and that cannot be asked. Same with the financial status or your political views. So these are the question types that they cannot actually ask. And also at the end of the interview, the candidates have a chance to ask questions to the interviewers. So I call this interviewing the interviewer. And you can actually ask anything, really. But there are some questions that you should not ask, including some stupid questions. And if you're wondering about what questions you should not ask an interviewer, I actually have a fun video on that. So go take a look. Next up, so let's take a look at the illegal examples of some of these illegal questions under each of the types and categories. So we briefly talked about the genetic information. So what are the questions that may come up and they should not be asking? What are some of the ones that are kind of illegal to ask? Right here, remember we talked about age, weight, height, some of the information that's in your genes, like when were you born, how old are you? They're not allowed to ask that. Of course, certain jobs, like if you're going to be a bartender, then they would ask your age in a different way to say, oh, are you over the age of majority to serve alcohol and so on. So there are different ways to get around these questions, but the general rule of thumb is that they're not allowed to ask these questions directly during the interview. Same thing with offenses. They cannot ask directly, have you ever been convicted or arrested, or do you have any criminal records or charges? Of course, they can um, get your agreement to perform police background checks if the job requires or if they wish to. And the background questions. Remember, this is talking about your ethnicity, nationality, or maybe religion, faith, and so on. So, are you a Canadian citizen? Are you an American citizen? So they cannot ask you that, but what they can ask is, oh, are you legally permitted to, or do you have any restrictions against working in Canada or in the U.S.? So there are different ways to kind of get around these questions as well, but they just cannot ask you directly. Health information, they can't. Interviewers are not allowed to ask, do you have any disabilities or diseases, and so on. You can pause the video and take a look. Same thing, the family status. Are you married? What does your spouse do, partner do? Do you have any children? Who is going to take care of your children? Because, the employers would not want you taking, a couple days a week off, or, having somebody run late because they're dropping off their children at school, and so on. And the other types of questions, some of these as well. So feel free to pause the video and take a look. And if you do have an interview coming up, I do have quite a few clips and videos and tips on how to prepare for your interviews, including the most recent video actually is a complete list of interview questions with some answers. So I give you a list of 50 different questions that could come up in a job interview, including answers to some of these using the STAR technique, and share with you how you can actually formulate and prepare for these questions and answers. And if you're wondering what the STAR technique is, actually sometimes referred to as the STAR method, it's an acronym that actually creates an easy to follow story with conflict and resolution where you become the main protagonist, and it stands for situation, task, action, and result. And if you're wondering how to use that and when you can use that, there are also interview prep tips on those. So anyways, in this video we looked at the different types of illegal questions and some examples under each of the types, and I shared with you some tips on how to prepare for your next interview. So I'm Professor Job Offer, and I'm here to help you land your next job. Thanks for watching.